Bezrat Hashem. The parasha, and this week, Avraham Avinu sees three angels. Shlosha anashim are standing in front of him, and Rashi writes that they're angels, like we see later on in the parasha. And when Avraham Avinu sees them, the pasuk says, Vayaratz likatam. He sees them, and he runs to them. Mipetach ha'oel, from the opening of his tent. Vayishtachu arza, and he bows down. Vayomar, Avraham Avinu says, Adonai, imna matzati chen be'enecha. Adonai is the name of God usually. But Rashi here writes two pirushim. One is this lashon chol, and it means my master. Avraham Avinu spoke to the angel and said, my master, if I found grace in your eyes, please do not pass, stay here, stay to eat by my house. But then Rashi writes a second interpretation. Vayomar Adonai, Rashi writes Kodesh. It's a holy name of God. There's a big nafkamina halachically if the sofer has to write L'Shem Kedushat Hashem when he writes this word. There's a few places in the Torah and we're not so sure if it's kadosh or if it's mundane. Here Rashi writes both. So what does it mean? If it's holy, if it's the holy name of God, so what is Avraham Avinu saying? Vayomar Adonai imna matzati chen be'enecha al na tavor me'al avdecha. Says Rashi, Vayomer lakadosh baruch hu. Avraham Avinu said to Hashem, Le'amtin lo ad she'arutz ve'achnis et ha'orchim. Hashem, please do me a favor, wait here. I'm going to welcome these guests. So, in other words, Avraham Avinu tells Hashem, please, wait a second, I got something more important to do. I got to go welcome these guests right now. So the Gemara in Masechet Shabbat, in Daf Kuf Chav Zayin Amud Aleph, the Gemara says, Gadol hachnasat orchim. It is greater for a person to welcome guests into his house, mikabalat penei shechina, more than welcoming welcoming the divine presence of God, of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Beautiful. That's a beautiful, very famous drasha. We all are very learned and we know this, Baruch Hashem. We all heard this drasha. But the obvious question we have to ask is not why is it greater. Now we know it's greater. Okay, so now actually Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach learns an interesting halakha. I'll ask you guys a question. What happens if a person has a guest at his house and now he has to go pray mincha with the minyan? And if he leaves, the guest is going to have to leave. What do you do? Gabi, what do you do? You have a guest at your house.
I have two guests this Shabbat.
You have two guests, very good.
He's already planning that coming for mincha.
I have 50 guests.
So the best thing, Rav Shlomo Zalman writes, bring them to mincha with you. That's the best. But the question is, you know they're not going to come with you to mincha. They're going to stay at home, or they're just going to not come, forget about mincha. They're going to go home, who knows what they're going to do. If you have Argentinian guests, they're going to learn. They're going to do something good for sure. That's what they keep. But, or they're going to eat some meat with some chimichurri, some carne. Okay, but a regular guest. And you know, if I leave, he's not staying. What do? Do you stay and pray home mincha alone, or do you leave? Don't say that I told you this, and don't use this card on me, please. I'm recording already if you want, I'll send it to you. Says Rav Shlomo Zalman, Gadol hachnasat orchim mikabalat penei shechina. You want to go receive the shechina at the Beit HaKnesset? Yeah, but now you're doing hachnasat orchim, mitzvat aseh d'oraita. Again, I think that you have to, don't leave and say, you heard what he said. Don't do that to me, Gabi, please. Don't do that. I already know you. You're about to walk out and say, that's what I heard, alamak, good. I'm not, why were you not mincha? Ariel said not to come. Hazaku Baruch. That's not what I said. I did kind of, but so what you should do is you should bring them with you for sure. But really, it's a big chidush. You see, Kabbalat Achnasat Orchim, what a big thing is. But the question we have to ask is, okay, fine. We learned it from Avraham Avinu, but how did Avraham Avinu learn such a thing? The obvious the common logic is, you have the Shekhinah, or you have three Bedouin. 3 people, 3 nomads in the desert that you don't know, you never seen. What should I do? And it's a no-brainer, honestly. If you didn't learn Chumash Rashi, or you didn't learn Gemara Shabbat Kuf Chav Zayin, it's a no-brainer. HaKadosh Baruch Hu are 3 guests. What do? HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Anyone who says otherwise, I would have told you you're a fool, but now that we have Chazal, I tell you Chazak Baruch. You have Chazal. So, but the common instinct would be, no, stay here. You're talking to God. You literally have Ruach HaKodesh. But Olam is speaking directly to you. Stay. Don't go. So why is it that how did Avraham learn that really it's better for me to go than to stay here with Hashem? So first of all, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it says in the pasuk, V'hu yoshev petach ha'oel, he's sitting in the opening of his tent, kechom hayom, at the scorching heat of the day. So Rashi HaKadosh writes, based on the Gemara as well, HaKadosh Baruch Hu hotzi chama min artika. Hashem took the sun out of its layer that protects it from being scorching hot. Sorry, from not being hot. And he made it super hot. Why did he do that? Hashem said, Chazit, the guy's 100 years old. He's on the third day of his Brit Milah. He's not feeling well. I want him to go back and lay in bed. So what did Hashem do? He made it super hot. So Avraham would get the message and go back. But obviously Avraham was so devoted to Torah and mitzvot that he didn't care about himself. And he had one desire more than he did than his own personal well-being. And that is doing thought-provoking or doing mitzvot and being mekadesh Shem Shamayim barabim, sanctifying the name of God publicly. So what did he do? He didn't go in. He stayed outside. Okay, but he wanted to stay out. So he figured, all right, if Hashem brought me these guests, it must be because he's trying to teach me. So that's the classic answer. He's trying to show me, look, I want you to go welcome them and then go back in the house. But I saw a beautiful pirush. It says in the end of this week's parasha, who knows what the last topic in this week's parasha, Parashat Vayera, is? What's the last topic? Akedat Yitzhak. The Akedah in chapter 22 in Sefer Bereshit. And it says in the pasuk that Abraham takes the ma'achelet. Vaishlach Avraham et yado. Avraham Avinu sends his hand. Vaikach et ha'ma'achelet. And he takes the sword, the knife, to do shechitah. Why do you have to say he takes his hand? He sends his hand, literally, to go take the sword. He picks up the sword. How do you pick up a ma'achelet? With his ears? With his feet? Obviously with his hand. Why does it have to say 4 words? Vaishlach Avraham et yado. Say vaikach et ha'ma'achelet. Nekuda, period. That's it. Why does it have to say he sent his hand? So in Netivot Shalom, you love Netivot Shalom, right? Admor Mislonim. Listen to what he says. You probably know this. You know all of the Chidushim in Netivot Shalom. Mozi Baruch Hashem that book is very dear to him. So in Netivot Shalom, he writes in this week's parasha a beautiful interpretation. He says, Avraham Avinu, alav Shalom, he had 248 organs that only did one thing and one thing only. It's not what do I want to do right now. Should I pick up another cock or not? Should I pick up this croissant or not? His hands did only what Hashem wanted. He wasn't born like that. It took him many, many years. Here in this week's Parashat till 100, and Akedah till 137. And he's at an old age, 137 years old according to most interpretations. And he lived 137 years of what's called Baba Yamim. You know what Baba Yamim is? He came with his days. Every single second of his life, he lived to the fullest potential. He maximized his potential in Avodat Hashem Yitbarach, in the service of God. And therefore his organs did only one thing. They only moved based on the will of God. And therefore says the Admor Mislonim, did Hashem want him to slaughter Yitzhak? No. He said, Aleu Leolah, he already did that. Put him up on the altar. That's what he said. He didn't want him to slaughter him. Of course, he told him that. Avraham didn't know that. But what happened when he had to come pick up the knife? His hand wouldn't move. Says the Admor Mislonim, his hand didn't let him move. It was stuck. He literally froze. What did he have to do? Vaishlach Avraham et yado. He took his left hand and he pulled his right hand over to the knife. Against his will. Because his hand only moved according to the will of God. And therefore when he had to go, what happened? What happened? It got stuck. He had to literally pull it against his will. That's what he says. That's how Kadosh Avraham Avinu was. So based on that answer, I would like to say the same idea here in this week's parasha. Avraham Avinu sees guests. You know what happened when he saw them? His instinct was his feet started running. He just ran. He saw them. He said, wow. It was his first instinct. That's how much he instilled within him Midat HaChesed. And you know what happened? Hashem didn't stop him. So why should Hashem stop him? I'll prove it to you. It says in literally the first pasuk in the Parashat Vayera elav Adonai be'olei mamre v'hu yoshev. How should it say? It's written Yashav. Yun, Shid, Vav. He sat in past tense. How does it say? He is sitting in present tense. Rashi was bothered by that. And he says, Yashav Ktiv. It says in past. Bikesh la'amod. He wanted to stand up. And what happened? Hashem said, no, sit down. Sit down. I'm going to teach you a lesson now that when a Dayan is judging, the people that he's judging stand up, but the Dayan sits down. And you will be the proof for your kids. So we see when Avraham tried to stand, what happened? Hashem made him sit down. Here, his feet ran already to go welcome the guest. That was his second nature. That was his instinct. That's how much chesed was literally injected and infused within him. And that is a big message we could take with us. We have to train ourselves to do it. And I'll conclude with one last statement. What's a better mitzvah? To give $100 one time, or to give 100 singles 100 times? You say, what's the difference? You give $100 and here you gave $100. Correct. But the Rambam says we're not correct. Says the Rambam, he explains it on a Mishnah in Pirkei Avot, Hakol lefi rov ha'ma'aseh. Everything is based on a majority of the actions, a lot of actions. Says the Rambam that 100 times a penny or 100 times $1 is not one time $100. You know what the difference is? You accustomed your body to give 100 times. You gave yourself, even if it's $1. You're used to every single day doing midat chesed. You're accustoming yourself to doing chesed. Avraham Avinu lived so much doing Ratzon HaKadosh Baruch Hu that his body ran to do the will of Hashem. We should be zocheh bezat Hashem to also train ourselves and teach ourselves every single second in our life. Our question should be, what does Hashem want me to do right now? Should I talk? Should I not talk? Should I speak in the Hazah or not speak? Sometimes the answers are self-explanatory. But just ask yourself the question. And we should always be zocheh to do the will of God. Hazaku baruch rabotai.